Welcome, everyone. And now Donald Trump's global tariffs regime has just snapped into effect, raising import taxes to the highest level since the Great Depression of the 1930s. A wide variety of products will be affected, from appliances made in the European Union to autos from Japan to food, furniture, toys, smartphones, and more. Dozens of countries, both friend and foe, have been targeted, anywhere from a baseline 10% up to 50% levies on goods headed for U.S. markets. In this episode of your Spotlight program, we'll discuss the rationale for Donald Trump's trade war, its efficacy, its perceived stress on global, including U.S. markets, its effects on inflation and consumers, and its impact on political alignments. Let's watch this report first, and then we'll get started.
Donald Trump's latest round of sweeping tariffs on 69 countries has taken effect early Thursday, in what his administration says is a move to protect American industries and reduce trade imbalances. Imports from many countries had previously been subject to a baseline 10% duty, but the U.S. president has frequently modified his tariff plan, slapping some countries with much higher rates. The tariffs range from 35% on goods from Canada to 50% on Brazil. The hike in tariffs on Brazil come after Trump claimed the U.S. runs a trade deficit with the Latin American country. But figures show it runs a multi-million-dollar surplus, meaning the United States sells more to Brazil than it buys. This will also likely negatively affect the U.S. coffee industry. Critics argue that the tariffs on Brazil are more about political retaliation over the prosecution of Trump's ally, former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who is facing trial over an alleged coup attempt. Meanwhile, Trump has threatened India with higher 50% tariffs if the country does not stop buying Russian oil by the end of the month.
We did it with India. We're doing it probably with a couple of others. One of them could be China. Yes.
Trump has also threatened to increase tariffs on the EU to 35% if the bloc fails to meet a $600 billion investment pledge.
The Trump threat of 35% tariff, if they don't make the number, is very much in line with what everybody has been warning about, that Trump is unpredictable, and this deal didn't really remove any sort of uncertainty from the trade relationship, since he, at the blink of an eye, just turns around and makes another tariff threat if his demands aren't met. So
governments in India, Canada, Switzerland, and several European Union member states have denounced the tariffs as economically short-sighted, warning they could inflame tensions and disrupt established trade flows. Inflation in the U.S. is also projected to rise, driven in part by higher import costs across sectors, including automobiles, electronics, and agriculture. Many economists maintain that the measures will increase costs for American consumers and businesses, while offering few benefits in return.
And now for your guests. Joining us, Mr. Don DeBar, activist and commentator from New York. And also Mr. William Jones, the Washington Bureau Chief at the Executive Intelligence Review, joining us from U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. Mr. Don DeBar, we're going to start with you. Welcome to have, pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to our Spotlight program, sir. I guess, so after months of delays and extensions, this day is upon us, Mr. DeBar, with overall average effect tariff rate rising to over 17%. I know we have this baseline 10%, but on average, we're speaking of 17% tariffs, mainly due to higher levies on Americans' bigger trade partners, ironically. Your initial thoughts on this ultimate Donald Trump U.S. flex against the entire planet?
Certainly something big is underway, both in terms of actual, say, restructuring perhaps, and also in terms of politicking, public relations, etc. Tariffs have not really been a part of the mainstream public discussion, as people have referenced for 100 years. They're actually an esoteric part of tax policy, which in turn is generally an esoteric part of any discussion about policy, general finance of governments and the impacts that government spending and government taxes have on various aspects of the economy. The restructuring aspect is intended, at least this is the claim, the public relations presentation aspect of it. This is what people voted for here, by the way, is to bring more manufacturing jobs into the United States. You can't really understand what's happening in terms of both the impact to the global economy and also the impetus behind this without understanding that you have both the nation states as individual actors and also a very heavy class dimension to this. Within the countries, you have the elites and basically the rest of the working class. And internationally, you have the imperium and those who are either directly controlled by it or in one way or another have their movement seriously circumscribed. You can put different nations in different places, I would say, looking at the General Assembly roll call from time to time, for example, like over Cuba sanctions or Israel genocide. The most directly controlled countries are those like Palau, Marshall Islands, Israel, one or two others. Then there are the class in Europe that abstain whenever there's something that obviously should be done but don't. And then, though, there's behind the veil of the government policies, the actual industrial policies of the people who own the economy in these different countries. I would point out, for example, that the people who own BMW and Volkswagen, and other automobile manufacturers in Europe have seen their position, tossed aside at basically U.S. policy whim over things like, cutting off the pipeline with Russia for oil and gas and all of this. So what Trump is doing now, he's taking big wand strokes across the, across the bow. I guess it's a shot across the bow internationally, with the avowed intent to bring manufacturing jobs home. Whatever entrenched interests there are that brought us to where we are, and that's a very complex mixture, are resisting it. And whatever, if there's a real contradiction between Trump and this so-called deep state, that's also a factor. And if it's not, if that contradiction doesn't really exist and they're play acting, they're bound to play act through this in front of the audience that they have polarized in a way that currently exists. So, the short answer is right now, no one really knows what's going to happen. Most of what's being described as effect is propaganda from one side or the other, good, bad, or indifferent. And the serious players, I would say Iran among them, Russia, China, India, Brazil, others, they're sitting back and watching and looking at their options and standing together. And that's what has to happen.
And Don, what Trump is trying to do here, and you kind of alluded to it, perhaps, I don't know, maybe it's too early to tell if this is the way or it's not the way. A lot of analysts feel it isn't, okay? But it's not an original idea either. I remember this specifically floated by both Bush Jr. and Bush Sr. by the Obama administration. From both sides of the aisle, we've heard them speak often, both Barack Obama and both Bushes, about trade injustices and anomalies and that they need to be addressed. How come none of them, none of those three administrations, both Republican, Democrat alike, pull the trigger on something this extreme?
Well, you have a number of things. First of all, the domestic situation here has only grown more and more, worse and worse, basically, for working people. Anyone that drives through places like Pittsburgh or Cleveland or other former industrial cities, Detroit, in the United States, sees that the cities can't even maintain their infrastructure. The drinking water is contaminated in places like Flint, Michigan. It's a horror show here. And 40 years ago, they said, well, we're going to make a minor adjustment to trade policy and bring back jobs. And so the people that just got laid off voted for the person that said they would do that. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. The only thing that's happened is that more and more, not just by the way, manufacturing jobs, but even the middle and upper management jobs started to get sourced out. I mean, if you thought about just the, I don't know, the class dynamics involved here, they started getting rid of the jobs for the most powerless people first, with the more powerful in the working and management classes, making some money on that and enthusiastically doing it. And now you've got AI that's going to be taking the place of some of the corporate CEOs within a year or two or three. And so what happened is that people here just got more and more desperate, and the political situation got more and more desperate. I'll give you a quick example. When I went to cover the 2016 presidential, the two conventions, I went to Cleveland for the Republican convention, and Trump was the first time he was the nominee. And I went there actually to cover the protests because I had heard from all of the groups that I know on the left primarily, they were going to shut down the RNC because Trump was such a danger, et cetera, et cetera. I got picked up by a cabbie who it turned out had 2 PhDs, one in philosophy and one in history. And I said to him why I was there, and he said, there's not going to be any protests. And I asked him why not, and he said, the people here won't tolerate it. He's the only guy in decades that's promised to get them their jobs back. And they've adhered to him as he's appeared to work on that problem. And I think that the reason that's been allowed to happen is these people could be doing something else because their situation is so desperate. These cities have people, drug addiction all over the place, alcoholism, murders, domestic violence, everything that you see when you see people who are desperate and expect that they're supposed to be somewhere else doing something else. And there hasn't been a solution offered to them, any tangible solution offered to them in a very long time. And so I think that this is either this is going to have some kind of an effect to bring these jobs back to these people, and whether that's a good or bad thing for the rest of the world is another matter. But even if it doesn't, it's buying time for somebody because it looks like something's being done. And that's why the support for him.
It looks like to a lot of people, Don, to a lot of people, it looks like a power move by the U.S., especially a lot of global U.S. trade partners. I mean, the dollar, it's already the global standard. You're already winning when you're the U.S. government and you're the U.S. Everyone's using the dollar, but now what does a power move like this do? Friends and foes alike look at it like economic imperialism, that they're being they're having something shoved down their throats, and guess what that does? That pushes them towards alternatives like BRICS, like a new world set up, a restructuring. To your point that you mentioned earlier, I mean, this is all in detriment to U.S. interests and objectives.
It's also to detriment of the interests and objectives of the entire planet, because what should be happening is a long discussion, a collaborative discussion about what the needs of our species are and what resources we have to apply to them and how that can be done for the benefit of the most people with the least oppression of anyone being subsumed, in accomplishing this thing. And that is the antithesis pretty much of what happens when you have the leading imperial power on the planet basically trying to, bull in a china shop his way through whatever. I mean, the objectives outside of, very general ones, such as we want to bring jobs back to America and we want to be first again, whatever the hell that means. The people have no idea what it's supposed to mean for their lives when these maniacs come to their country, other than seeing what happens in places like Gaza and, in Iran, places where, maybe a bomb's going to fall from something the U.S. sent over this afternoon. It's an insane method of doing this. But I don't know if the tariffs weren't happening, most of the rest of this would still be happening. I'm just looking at that sort of as a component of this, trying to figure out what the real intention is. And I think, as I said, part of it, a heavy part of it, is addressing domestic discontent. Because in the same way that these people have been sucking wealth from everywhere else in the world and pushing everyone around for decades, they've also been doing it to the bulk of the people in this country. Only here, they weren't used to it. And now that they've become used to it, they're very restless. And so there's a component of this that is intended to put them to rest for a while so they can do God knows what.
And Yale's budget lab has calculated, Don, that the inflationary effect of these tariffs will cost a typical household in America an average as much as $2,400 this year. This year alone, it forecasts one of the biggest impacts will be clothing, with consumers facing about 40% higher prices for shoes, about 38% for apparel, a considerable jump in vehicles. And these projections are all over the internet from different sources and in relations to different products. I'm sure you could imagine. So to your point that Donald Trump has appealed to the working class American, he's got their vote, he got into office. That, I mean, is this really good for the working class, a consumer in America in the short term or even in the long term? The way it looks on paper, it doesn't really declare much for them, does it?
Well, I would say, even if it improves their, material situation in the short term, it's not in their interest here either. See, the condition that exists is that somehow this particular class that dominates this country and a good part of the rest of the world gets to maintain their position longer. And maybe it's eroding this part of the world or that part of the world more or less quickly, but it's hungry and it's going to feed on everything, including these people they're trying to buy them off again, like they were able to do for decades after World War II. The real thing I think that's going to, well, first of all, it's going to be inflation. Of course, per se, it's inflationary. The point is to raise the prices of imported goods so the consumers, quote unquote, make different choices. That it's almost, anyway. So the intended effect is to change the behavior of people who are buying things at this price as imports to either A, buy something similar that's manufactured here, or to buy something else that's manufactured here. Well, I can't afford cotton shirts made in India anymore because instead of being $10, they're now $70. So I don't need another shirt. What can I afford? Oh, I can buy a paddle for my swimming pool, or I can buy a glass of water because I'm, in other words, shifting their purchases and their behavior. Then what happens as a consequence of that? Because in the old models, like we're talking 100 years ago, models of economics, if you put money in the hands of this business person or that business person, they either expand or contract their business and make more or less of these things, et cetera. Theoretically, they start hiring because we're selling more stuff, we need to hire more help. Actually, it's not that way. Complete automation, even of much of management, and also with the liquidity in terms of ownership of these various production engines, machines, corporations, whatever, you could be shifting everybody to buy domestically produced stuff today and then offer nothing tomorrow because they got all the money now and move the operation to Iran or Russia or Japan or wherever. The whole thing doesn't respond classically.
We don't have a lot of time, Don. I really want to get you to shift onto the political dimension of this because it's just as pressing as the rest of it. On Wednesday, Trump hiked the tariff rate for India up to 50% over the nation's purchase, you very well know, of Russian oil, which he said is allowing Russia to finance the Ukraine war. Now, this is literally political motives here. He's using these tariffs. He's weaponizing them against. Now, and that's just not where he's doing it. With the European Union, he feels like European countries have inadequate contributions to NATO spending. Thus, he is using the tariffs for political repercussions in that space. Not to mention China, where that row shifted up until 148% a couple months ago. That got negotiated way down, still on a ridiculous number. So your thoughts on the political dimensions of this and how you're taking your European vassals that you've controlled for post-Second World War for 70 years and putting that relationship at risk.
Yeah, 80 as a matter of fact, right? Hiroshima was 80 years ago today, or yes. Yeah. Well, first of all, there's an economic dimension to that. I won't go into it, but think about the fact what he's trying to get them to do is buy more weapons with their money. And that is to get a stimulus, because all we make here basically are guns and things like that. So there's that. In terms of the political dimension, I mean, the alternative to this crumbling empire is the rising BRICS. And at the heart of BRICS is the IC, India and China, or the RIC. And there have been revolving sets of contradictions between Russia, China, and India over the post-war period. They were very deftly exploited by Kissinger and Brzezinski and some others up until maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And so anything that they can do to create tension, they'll do it. India, you're going to do business with Russia against our interests, so we're going to do this to you. Well, can Russia afford to fix that? Will China continue to afford to, mortar over this stuff? The game that's being played by these people here is to try to create contradictions there so that they can basically dismantle the BRICS. They've been working on Brazil. Bolsonaro was an example of that for a good while. You saw, what's been happening in South Africa on and off over the past few years. They're working all 5 of those countries and anyone else that's involved to try to make that not happen. Because as that happens, the world finds more and more of its space and people free from this empire. That's a project everyone should be working on, by the way, finding where you are, how to do that.
And did you see Spain scrap its order for F-35 fighter jets just the other day? Not a good look, is it? And also Trump boasted about reaching that deal with the Europeans. He sat right next to Ursula von der Leyen saying that they're going to invest over $600 to $800 billion in the U.S. market in goods, in weapons, to your point just a moment ago. And then a couple of parliamentarians came out the next day and said, look, this is up to private industry. We can't force them to buy American products. We hope they will, but they may not. And now Trump's saying if they don't, I'm going to bump the tariffs on Europe from 15 back up to 35%. Your final thoughts, is this how you strengthen or lose an empire, Don?
I guess we're going to find out. I don't think anyone knows the answer to that. I think that one thing we have to be careful of is not to personalize this. There's a lot of people in this country, in powerful corners of this country, that would like to see Trump and the whole, assemblage around him completely shoved out of the political sphere altogether. And I think people, as good as that might be, people have to look at exactly who it is that's poised to fill that space and will fill that space if and when that happens. And I'm not so sure it's going to be even better.
All right, good stuff. Pleasure to have you on, Don. I want to apologize to our viewers. It seems like Mr. William Jones from the Executive Intelligence Review was unable to join us in the program, but I want to also thank Mr. Don DeBar for hanging out with us the entire time and sharing his utmost with us. That was Mr. Don DeBar, their activist and commentator, joining us from New York here. And viewers, that brings us to the end of your Press TV Spotlight program. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.